Hari Hari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today is a very auspicious day. It's a double appearance day. It's the appearance day of one of the most magnificent incarnations, Lord Krishna, Sri Vamana Dev, and it is also the appearance day of one of the 6 Goswamis, Jiva Goswami. So recently we've come to learn a lot about Jiva Goswami by the mercy of Indra Maharaj, who's in Vrindavan researching a lot about the Vaishnavas and the great saints, and also Krishna's pastimes, of course. And some of us have been eagerly waiting every couple of days for him to put out the new lecture that he's giving, or whatever series it is, and it's been going on for a year and a half, and it's absolutely nectar. He gave a class on Jiva Goswami. He gave a lecture on Jiva Goswami a few months ago, about 7 months ago, and there's a lot of dimensions that have come out about Jiva Goswami which actually enrich the lives of the Vaishnavas. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit this morning. But first of all, we will talk about Sri Vamana Dev and his glorious pastimes. And he's had everlasting impact on all the conditioned souls in this material universe. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I'll begin with the pastimes of Lord Vamana Dev. They're elaborately, I'll read from the 8th canto. There's about 5 or 6 chapters elaborating on his particular incarnation, and the chapters before, the canto before, the 7th canto, deals with the incarnation of Lord Nrsimhadev, and it begins there. Actually, the story really begins. There's a situation whereby there's a universal order throughout all time, where the demigods are in control. We hear of 33 million demigods controlling all the different aspects of the universe: the wind, the fire, the rain, the day, the night, the sun, the stars, and so on and so forth. But somehow or other, it's been an upheaval. The king of heaven, we know King Indra, normally has a reign of 71 kalpas, where he's in charge of the heavenly planets, where living entities who follow the Karmakanda section of the Vedas aspire to reach and enjoy for a period of time, drinking somarasa and so on. But with the advent of these big, huge 2 demon twins, Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha, the universe was cast into upheaval. That by the potency, we heard about Hiranyakashipu, how he meditated on the tips of his toes for 100 celestial years, and he received the benediction that he would practically be immortal. Not quite, but practically. He couldn't be killed in so many different ways, and he thought he was immortal. He thought. Then, of course, Lord Nrsingadev upended him, bifurcated him. But at that point in time, what he'd done away with the demigods as the rulers of the universe, and he put the demons in there. So he summoned the demons from my understanding, from the subterranean heavenly planets where the demons usually reside, and they came to the heavenly planets, and they were under the jurisdiction of Hiranyakashipu. So when Lord Nrsingadev came along and dispensed with Hiranyakashipu, he gave the kingdom to his erstwhile pure devotee Prahlad Maharaj. So Prahlad Maharaj ruled the kingdom, but still the demons were there. He ruled the kingdom of demons. So, of course, King Indra was reinstated. So there was an unholy truce between the demigods and the demons in the heavenly realms, which never seemed to last that long. So the demons attacked the demigods and vice versa, and it just followed that the demons had the jurisdiction over the heavenly planets. So when the demigods appealed to Lord Vishnu, then Lord Vishnu arranged that great big churning of the milk ocean, that's in the 8th canto, where they were churning the ocean for the elixir, the nectar of immortality, which was meant for the demigods, and that would enable them to gain strength and get control of the heavenly planets once again over the demons. So that actually eventuated by the help of Lord Vishnu in his incarnation. Of 4 incarnations actually. He incarnated as Kurma, he incarnated as a Jita to keep the mountain steady, and then he incarnated as Mohini Murti. Another incarnation was it? 3? The horse. Hayagriva. So it ended up that there was a big fight. The demons, having been tricked by Mohini Murti, raised objection and started to fight with the demigods for the kingdom. And in that fight, the ruler of the demons, which was Bali Maharaj, by that time Bali Maharaj was the grandson, so Prahlad had passed the kingdom on to his son Virochana, and then Virochana died untimely. So the King Indra had something to do with it. So Bali Maharaj was the king, and he had a grudge against Indra, big grudge. So there was this big fight between the demigods and the demons lost because the demigods had the nectar of immortality. And Bali Maharaj was killed actually, and he was revived by his spiritual master Shukracharya. So that was the background, and I'd just like to read the introduction of the next 4 or 5 chapters. So it gives the story very, very elaborately so we can understand the greatness of Lord Vamana Dev. So, chapter 15, Bali Maharaj conquers the heavenly planets. Maharaj Parikshit wanted to understand how Lord Vamana Dev, on the plea of taking 3 paces of land from Bali Maharaj, took everything away from him and arrested him. Sukadev Goswami responded to this inquiry with the following explanation. In the fight between the demons and the demigods as described in the 11th chapter of this canto, Bali was defeated and he died in the fight, but by the grace of Shukracharya he regained his life. It's called the Jivan Mukta, that the spiritual Vasta has the potency to chant these mantras and give these herbs that regain the life, whereby the person who lost his life can regain his life. So Shukracharya was using that to reinstate the lives of the demons. Thus he engaged himself in the service of Shukracharya, the spiritual master. The descendants of Brigu, being pleased with him, engaged him in the Vishvajit Yajna. At this point in time, it is to be understood that Bali Maharaj, he was in a very conflicting lineal succession, that on one hand his great-grandfather was Hiranyakasipu, but his grandfather was Prahlad Maharaj. So there was that demoniac, he was in charge of the demons, so there was some propensity there for him to control the demons, but at the same time, having the Shakti of Prahlad Maharaj, he was totally attracted to the Brahminical culture. And so this is what attracted all these great souls, like Bhrigu, who's one of the most famous munis of all time. So descendants of Bhrigu, being pleased with him, engaged him in Vishvajit Yajna. When this yajna was performed, the fire yajna came, from the fire yajna came chariot, horses, a flag, a bow, armour, and 2 quivers of arrows. Maharaj Prahlad, Bali Maharaj's grandfather, gave Bali an eternal garland of flowers, and Sukracharya gave him a conch shell. Bali Maharaj, after offering obeisances to Prahlad, the Brahmanas, and his spiritual master Sukracharya, equipped himself to fight with Indra and went to Indrapuri with his soldiers. Blowing his conch shell, he attacked the outskirts of Indra's kingdom. When Indra saw Bali Maharaj's prowess, he went to his own spiritual master, Brihaspati, told him about Bali's strength and inquired about his duty. Brihaspati informed the demigods that because Bali had been endowed with extraordinary power by the Brahmanas, the demigods could not fight with him. Their only hope was to gain the favour of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Indeed, there was no alternative. Under the circumstances, Brihaspati advised the demigods to leave the heavenly planets and keep themselves somewhere invisible. The demigods followed his orders, and Bali Maharaj, along with his associates, gained the entire kingdom of Indra. The descendants of Bhrigu Muni, being very affectionate to their disciple Bali Maharaj, engaged him in performing 100 Ashvamedha Yajnas. In this way, Bali enjoyed the opulence of the heavenly planets. So Sukracharya, he's one of the sons of Bhrigu Muni. Is that correct? The descendants of Bhrigu? That could be the case. So therefore, he's got the favour of all the Brahmanas and the spiritual master, and him and the demigods have resumed their process. So chapter 17. Chapter 16 goes to, we'll talk about, lost it? It's all about Aditi, the mother of the demigods. Of course, when the mother sees that the demigods are suffering so much, there was Diti and Aditi. Diti was the mother of the demigods, and Aditi was the mother of the demons. And they were 2 sisters. So, since the demigods were not visible in the heavenly kingdom, their mother, Aditi, because of separation from them, was very much aggrieved. One day, after many, many years, the great sage Kashyapa emerged from a trance of meditation and returned to his ashram. He saw that the ashram was no longer beautiful and that his wife was very morose. Everywhere in the ashram he saw signs of lamentation. The great sage therefore inquired from his wife about the well-being of the ashram and asked her why she looked so morose. After Aditi informed Kashyapa Muni about the ashram's well-being, she told him she was lamenting for the absence of her sons. She then requested him to tell her how her sons could return to reoccupy their positions. She wanted all good fortunes for her sons. When the deity expressed her desire to worship Lord Vasudeva, Prajapati Kashyapa told about a process of worship known as Payavrata, which is executed in 12 days. Lord Brahma had instructed him how to satisfy Lord Krishna by this process, and thus he advised his wife to observe the vow and the religious principles. After a deity performed the Payavrata ceremony for 12 continuous days, the Lord, who was certainly very pleased with her, appeared before with 4 hands and dressed in yellow garments. As soon as a deity saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead present before her, she immediately got up and with great ecstatic love for the Lord, she fell to the ground to offer respectful obeisances. A deity's throat was choked because of ecstatic feelings, and her entire body trembled with devotion. Although she wanted to offer suitable prayers to the Lord, she could not do anything unless she remained silent for some time. Then, feeling solace, observing the beauty of the Lord, she offered her prayers. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the super soul of all living entities, was very pleased with her, and he agreed to become her son by incarnating as a plenary expansion. He was already pleased by Kashyapa Muni's austerities, and thus he agreed to become their son and maintain the demigods. After giving his word of honour to this effect, the Lord disappeared. Following the order of Supreme Personality of Godhead, a deity engaged in the service of Kashyapa Muni, who could see by samadhi that the Lord was within him, and who thus placed his semen in the womb of a deity. Lord Brahma, who was known as Hiranyagarbha, understood the Supreme Personality of Godhead had entered a deity's womb, thus he offered prayers to the Lord. Chapter 7, Chapter 18. Lord Vamana appeared in this world from the womb of a deity, completely equipped with conch shell, disc, club and lotus. His bodily hue was blackish and he was dressed in yellow garments. Lord Vishnu appeared at an auspicious moment on Shravana Dvadasi, which is today, when the Abhijit star had arisen. At that time, all the 3 worlds, including the high planetary systems, outer space and this earth, all the demigods, the cows, the brahmanas, and even the seasons were happy because of God's appearance. Therefore, this auspicious day is called Vijaya, when the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has a Satchidananda body, appeared as the son of Kashyapa and Aditi. Both his spirits were very astonished. After his appearance, the Lord assumed the form of a dwarf, Vamana. All the great sages expressed their jubilation, and with Kashyapa Muni before them, they performed the birthday ceremony of Lord Vamana. At that time, Lord Vamana's sacred thread ceremony, he was honoured by the sun god, Brihaspati, the goddess presiding over the planet Earth, the deities of the heavenly planets, his mother, Lord Brahma, Kavera, the 7 rishis and others. Lord Vamanadev then visited the sacrificial arena on the northern side of the Narmada River at the field known as Brigu Kacha, where Brahmanas of the Brigu dynasty were performing yagyas, wearing a belt made of munja straw. Ever heard of that, munja straw? Anybody know munja straw? No? An upper garment of deerskin and a sacred thread, and carrying in his hands a danda, an umbrella and a water pot, kamandalu. Lord Vamanadev appeared in the sacrificial arena of Maharaj Bali. Because of his transcendental, effulgent presence, all the priests were diminished in their prowess, and thus they all stood from their seats and offered prayers to Lord Vamanadev. Even Lord Shiva accepted on his head the Ganges water generated from the toe of the Lord. Chapter 19. When Bali Maharaj, thinking Vamanadev to be the son of a Brahmana, told him to ask anything he liked, asked for anything he liked, Lord Vamanadev praised Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha for their heroic activities. And after this, praising the family in which Bali Maharaj had been born, he begged the king for 3 paces of land. Bali Maharaj agreed to give this land in charity, since this was very insignificant. But Sukracharya, who could understand that Vamana was Vishnu, the friend of the demigods, forbade Bali Maharaj to give this land. Sukracharya advised Bali Maharaj to withdraw his promise. He explained to him that in subduing others, in joking, in responding to danger, in acting for the welfare of others and so on, one could refuse to fulfill one's promise, and there would be no fault. But this philosophy Sukracharya tried to dissuade Bali Maharaj from giving the land to Lord Vamana. Chapter 20. After hearing the instructive advice of Sukracharya, Bali Maharaj became contemplative, because it is the duty of a householder to maintain the principles of religion, economic development and sense gratification. Bali Maharaj thought it improper to withdraw his promise to the brahmachari. To lie or fail to honour a promise given to a brahmachari is never proper, for lying is the most sinful activity. Everyone should be afraid of the sinful reactions to lying, for Mother Earth cannot even bear the weight of a sinful liar. The spread of a kingdom or empire is temporary if there is no benefit for the general public. Such expansion has no value. Previously, all the kings and emperors expand their kingdoms with a regard for the welfare of the people in general. Indeed, while engaged in such activities for the benefit of the general public, eminent men sometimes even sacrifice their lives. It is said that one who is glorious in his activities, always living and never dies. Therefore, fame should be the aim of life, and even if one becomes poverty-stricken for the sake of a good reputation, that is not a loss. Bali Maharaj thought that even if his brahmachari Vamana were Lord Vishnu, if the Lord accepted this charity and then again arrested him, Bali Maharaj would not envy him. Considering all these points, Bali Maharaj finally gave in charity everything he possessed. Lord Vamana then immediately extended himself into a universal body. By the mercy of Lord Vamana, Bali Maharaj could see that the Lord is all-pervading and that everything rests in his body. Bali Maharaj could see Lord Vamana as the Supreme Vishnu, wearing a helmet, yellow garments, the mark of Srivastava jewel, and a flower garland, and ornaments decorating his body. Lord gradually covered the entire surface of the world, and by extending his body, he covered the entire sky. With his hands, he covered all directions. With his second footstep, he covered the entire upper planetary systems. Therefore, there was no vacant place where he could take his third footsteps. With the second step, the Supreme Person of Godhead reached the topmost planet of the universe, Brahmaloka, which he diminished in beauty by the effulgence of his toenails. Thus, Lord Brahma, accompanied by great sages like Marichi and the predominating deities of all higher planetary systems, offered humble prayers and worship to the Lord. They washed the Lord's feet and worshipped him with all the paraphernalia. Riksharaj Jambavan played his bugle to vibrate the glories of the Lord. When Bali Maharaj was deprived of all his possessions, the demons were very angry. Although Bali Maharaj warned them not to do so, they took up weapons against Lord Vishnu. All of them were defeated, however, by Lord Vishnu's eternal associates, and in accordance with Bali Maharaj's order, they all entered the lower planets of the universe. Understanding Lord Vishnu's purpose, Garuda, the carrier of Lord Vishnu, immediately arrested Bali Maharaj with the ropes of Varuna. When Bali Maharaj was thus reduced to a helpless position, Lord Vishnu asked him for the third step of land. Because Lord Vishnu appreciated Bali Maharaj's determination and integrity, when Bali Maharaj was unable to fulfill his promise, Lord Vishnu ascertained that the place for him would be the planet Sutala, which is better than the planets of heaven. So, of course, then Vamana Dev actually accompanied Bali Maharaj. He was so pleased by his attitude of surrendering everything that he went with him to Sutala Loka, and he's there as his doorkeeper on the Sutala planet. And of course, doorkeeper, it's like Krishna was the chariot driver of Arjuna. A doorkeeper is a doorkeeper. So that is the position. And of course, after this set of kalpas is finished, this 71 cycles of Kali Yuga in this particular kalpa, and then the Manus change over. At that point in time, Bali Maharaj, he is going to become the king of heaven. So he's a wonderful soul. And he's one of the Mahajans. And not only that, in this pastime, when Lord Vishnu, Vamana Dev, reached out with his toe, and he went past the Brahma Loka planetary systems to the covering of the universe. He not only reached the covering, but he split the covering and all the different, he pierced the universe with his toenail, and he pierced the coverings. There's all these outer layers of the universe, which also were pierced, allowing the waters of the causal ocean to flow into this universe. And Mahavishnu, he is floating on the waters of the causal ocean, creating, expanding and contracting all the universes. So therefore the waters of the causal ocean are spiritual, and then when it come to all the planetary systems of the universe, and when it arrived on the earthly planets, it became the great Ganges river, the Ganga, Mother Ganga. So the waters of the Ganga are totally spiritual, so there are so many benefits of purification by bathing in the Ganga. And not only that, when the Yamuna river flowed from Vrindavan to facilitate Lord Krishna's pastime, she also entered that same hole in the universe. And together they both flowed down to the earthly planets, and then of course when they hit the Himalayas, then the Ganga flowed off in a different direction to the Yamuna flowed off to a different direction as to the Ganga, and of course she went through Vrindavan. It's also said that actually when she left Vrindavan, she couldn't bear the separation from Vrindavan, so she came back again. So there's a hook in the Ganga. She approaches Vrindavan and goes on the way through to other great sacred areas of Bharatvaras. The quick summers of the pastimes, Lord Vamana, we will be getting there in the 8th canto, and we'll be talking about them in great detail. But right now I have about 20 minutes where I can say a few things about Jiva Goswami, who is one of the 6 Goswamis. For those people who study the altar, we see the picture of the 6 Goswamis there on the altar. And Jiva Goswami is one of the younger Goswamis. Srila Prabhupada actually writes in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, chapter 17, to understand Lord Chaitanya, follow 6 Goswamis, especially the path chalked out by Jiva Goswami. Another very important fact about Jiva Goswami is his Istadev, is his worshipful deity, who's rather Damodar deity. So Srila Prabhupada, when he was in Vrindavan, he was staying in Vamsivat originally, and he used to visit all the great temples, Gopinath Temple and Damodar Temple. And then one time in a dream, he saw that these great saints were chanting around Jiva Goswami Samadhi, which is in the Radha Damodar Temple. And it's like he noticed that they were benevolently looking at him, Srila Goswami and other great souls. He recognised that they were looking at him and smiling at him. So he took that as a message to move to the Radha Damodar Temple, and then he lived there for a number of years in those two rooms. When we go to Vrindavan, we visit those rooms, and then Srila Prabhupada called those call the Radha Damodar Temple the hub of the universe. So a very auspicious place. And it's said that the same deity is there, that when there's the big upheaval with the Muslim king Aurangzeb, and all the deities were removed to Jaipur, most of the deities stayed except Damodar came back, Radha Damodar. We say Radha Damodar, but actually there is no Radha, it's just a Damodar deity. It said that Radha is just the, she's known as the Achintya Shakti. So when Srila Prabhupada was going to America on his mission to spread the movement, Lord Chaitanya, he wrote that he felt great separation from Govinda, Gopinath and Radha Damodar deities. So that was Jiva Goswami's deity. So Jiva Goswami, in his spiritual form, he is described to be Velocimanjari. So Velocimanjari is one of the principal servants of Radharani, and her service was to fetch bath water for whenever Radharani needed water for bathing. And she would go to all the sacred spots and bring back water in golden jug inlaid with very many semi-precious, very many precious stones. We don't have semi-precious stones in Vrindavan, which is the real thing. And it's interesting to note that her clothes, she would wear black and golden garments that were striped like that of a honeybee. So when Jiva Goswami appeared on this earth, he took birth in Ramakeli. Of course, he was the son of Anupam, and Anupam was the brother of Rupa and Sanatam. So at one stage, the whole three brothers were living in Ramakeli. They were in the service of the Nawab, the Hussein Shah, who employed them, you could say almost blackmailed them into working for him. And they were very, very adept at what they did, running his treasury, managing his country while he was away on his different campaigns. He was very, very pleased by their service. But at one point in time, when Jiva Goswami was just a very young boy, 3 years old, Lord Chaitanya actually came to Ramakeli on his trip to Vrindavan. And it is said that Jiva Goswami was on the lap of his mother, and then as soon as he saw Lord Chaitanya, he just immediately got off, and he just was totally mesmerised by the beauty of Lord Chaitanya. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was speaking with Rupa and Sanatan about preaching strategy, how they were going to empower, how he wanted to empower them with the Sankirtan mission to spread the holy name of Krishna all over the universe, all over the world. He was listening behind a tree. Then Lord Chaitanya noticed that, and he said to Rupa and Sanatan, he said, "That boy over there, whatever work that you leave unfinished, this Jiva, he will finish it, or he will continue on that work." So he was totally transfixed by Lord Chaitanya. Then after that, he gave up playing with his friends from the age of 3, and he just began to worship his deities. He had some deities, and he would be singing to them, be arranging clothes, he'd be making garlands for him, even cooking for him, and said that he'd always be late for dinner because he'd always be worshipping his deities. And sometimes when it was really cold, he would take off his chadar and wrap him around his deities. So that was his total affection and preoccupation of his mind to serve his deities. He would be chanting Krishna Balaram all the time. And then one night, when he was 6 years old, Lord Chaitanya manifested to him in a dream, and he came as Gaur Nitai, and he told him that he was going to empower him and he was going to bless him with Gaura Prem. So then the boy got up in the morning, instead of chanting Krishna Balaram, he was chanting Gaura Nitai, Gaura Nitai, Gaura Nitai. And he ran to his mum and said, when can I give up everything and run to Gaura Nitai? 6 years old. So his mother said, that'll happen soon. It did actually happen soon, because when he was 10 years old, his father had passed away, and then his mother passed away, so he was by himself. So he left everything. He just left Ramakeli, and he went to Navadvip, and he took shelter of Lord Nityananda. And Lord Nityananda actually took him around Navadvip on the Parakram, and there's a record of that. It's a book called the famous Navadvip Mahatmya, is that right? And I'm not quite sure whether it was Lord Nityananda and Jiva and somebody else that went on the Parakram, or it was just Lord Nityananda. He took Jiva around the Parakram. He took him to all the sacred spots around Navadvip that Lord Chaitanya had been to, and where all the different incarnations. And that book is there still. I think I have a copy of that book, Navadvip Mahatmya, and we use that as a reference when we go on parikrams around Mayapur. And Nityananda actually espoused the glories of Mayapur. He said that actually as Kali Yuga becomes more and more degraded, that Navadvip Dham will become more and more intense in potency. And then he advised Jiva to join his uncles, because Jiva wanted to go, and at the age of 10 he wanted to go on pilgrimage to Jagannath to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But he said, no, actually his instruction was that Mahaprabhu has given you a special land to your family. Go to that place, which was Vrindavan Dham. So at this point in time, it's just to be noted that Jiva Goswami followed the Vani, the instructions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, over the Vapu, the association. So there's always the Vani and the Vapu, and everybody wants the Vapu, the association of the pure devotee. But sometimes the Vani takes the precedence. Just following the instructions is actually the pathway to all knowledge and pleasing the spiritual master. So when he began his journey, once again Lord Chaitanya appeared to him in a dream, and he told him to go to Vrindavan. He committed, he confirmed that. He said that together with your uncles, compose books that will illuminate the world. So he went to Varanasi. He's very young, still 10 years old. At Varanasi, he met the disciple of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was a really amazing scholar, and then Mayavadi became a devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he took shelter of this disciple whose name was Madhusudana Vajaspati. And he stayed in Varanasi for 9 years. Then he learnt all the Sanskrit texts, he learnt all the Vedas, he became an expert in Sanskrit. Srila Prabhupada actually confirms that in 1971, In a lecture June the 28th that Benares was the seat of Sanskrit scholars, and Jiva Goswami became one of the greatest Sanskrit scholars in Benares at that point in time. He stayed there for 9 years, and when he was 19, he was a renowned scholar. So he was armed with knowledge. So therefore he had his education, and he went to Vrindavan at that point in time. And when he got there, he was already famous. His reputation preceded him, and all the great Vaishnavas came and saw him. It was just like an astounding array of Vaishnavas: Raghunath Bhatt, Raghunath Das, Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Lokanath Maharaj, Magarva Swami, Magarva Maharaj, and then Prabodhananda, they all greeted Lokanath, and then Rupa Goswami took him on the parakram, a Raj Mandal parakram. So he took him around, and he took him into his, took him under his shelter. So then Jiva, he was asked, his first service for Rupa was that he was asked to proofread one of Rupa's books, which was the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar of Devotion. So he proofread it, and Rupa was so impressed with his scholarly prowess that he asked him to write a commentary on the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And he was so satisfied with it that later on, Sanatan Goswami also wrote, who was writing the Vaishnav Toshini, asked him to comment, write a commentary on that as well. And shortly after that, Rupa Goswami initiated him as his disciple, and that was the only disciple that he ever took. So later on, in 1542, Rupa was worshipping the famous Radha Govinda deities, and Radha Govinda appeared to Rupa in a dream and said, "Carefully observe this form." It was actually wasn't Rupa, it wasn't Radha Govinda, it was another form, and that form said to carefully observe me and carve this form and give it to Jiva Goswami, because I'm eager to taste that loving devotional service which will be given to me by Jiva Goswami. And that form was the Damodar deity. So very diligently Rupa Goswami carved that form, and then he gave it to Jiva Goswami, and that was the Radha Damodar deity. That was his worshipable deity, and that is the deity which is still there in the temple there in Vrindavan. As it is said that when the deity was transferred for safety to Jaipur, that after some time when it was safe to do so, he came back to Vrindavan, and that replica deity was placed there in Jaipur. So the original deity's there in Vrindavan. So, as I said before, Radha is present. There's only one deity, is the Damodar. There's Krishna, there's no Radha, but Radha is present there as a Chincha Shakti. So then Jiva Goswami had the deity, and he was worshipping the deity in Sevakunj, Radha Damodar, and then they erected a temple there where Radha Damodar temple is, and that then he worshipped him there. And it's said that there was a loving exchange between Jiva. Remember, like in his younger days, he used to worship the deity with so much affection. When he was a young boy, 3-4 years old, said that sometimes he would actually be seen hugging the deity. His mother was seen hugging the deity. So the loving exchanges were there between Jiva Goswami and Radha Madhava that sometimes Radha Damodar would ask him to make a special offering. So he would do that, and then he would sit and watch him eat. He would be in ecstasy just watching Radha Damodar eat that. And then one time Radha Damodar invited him to hear his flute playing. So he came and he was listening to the flute playing, and he was just so enchanted that he fainted. And then when he woke up in the morning, or when he woke up after some period of time, he composed this beautiful verse describing Krishna's pastimes. That is there. It's a bhajan. I can't remember the name of the bhajan, but it is there. So also after Rupa Goswami departed from this world, he was given Sanatan Goswami Srila, Govardhan Srila. Now you remember that Srila when Sanatan was walking around Govardhan and he was struggling to walk around. Krishna appeared to him and said, "You don't need to do that. What I'll do is I'll give you this, you circumambulate this Srila." And then Lord Krishna stood on it and put the imprint of his foot on it, and then he gave it to Sanatan. Sanatan worshipped that instead. So Jiva Goswami ended up with that Srila also. So while he was worshipping his deities, he also was a prolific writer, he was a prolific organizer. He wrote 25 books. Gopal Champu is one of them, 800 pages. It's a wonderful, wonderful book translated by Banu Maharaj. He wrote 550,000 verses, all with a stylus pen on a palm leaf. Now, the thing about writing with a pen on a palm leaf, you can't erase it. It just comes in as it is, and there's no erasing, there were no spell check corrections. It was meter perfect, and it had poetry and meaning. And he was described by many as being the greatest Sanskrit scholar that ever lived and the greatest philosopher in history. He also wrote a selection of books called the Satsandarbhas, which expounded the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and it defeated the Mayavadis. It was a very wonderful treatise, and Baladev Vijayapasana wrote this really nice poetic verse about Jiva Goswami's prowess. It's really beautiful. It goes like this: that by the mighty spade of his nectarian words, Jiva Goswami tossed aside the dirt of the fallacious arguments of the Sankarites and recovered Krishna's splendour from the pit of Vivrata Avara. May he be our refuge. So, Srila Prabhupada also said in 1976 that Jiva was the greatest scholar ever, past and present and in the future. Just a couple of little details. I'll keep going. You can all desert me for breakfast if you like. It's on the last page. Keep the nectar flowing. That at that point in time when Jiva Goswami was in charge of Vrindavan, he actually did become the head of the Vaishnav movement in Vrindavan. All the other Goswamis passed away because he's considerably younger. And then a lot of Vaishnavas from Bengal and everywhere would flock to his association, and he would make sure that they all had shelter, they all had food and be looked after. And he was regarded as being the principal head of Vaishnavism, probably throughout all of India. At one point in time, the Emperor Akbar, who we started to find out a lot about him, he was a great pious soul. He was the Muslim ruler, and he actually had two wives, and both of them were of a Vaishnav stock. So that's another story. But he orchestrated a debate between which is greater river, the Ganga or the Yamuna, and he invited Jiva Goswami to come and speak at Agra. So Jiva Goswami went there and he extolled all the pundits were there, and he spoke last. So he extolled the virtues of the Ganga, how it washed the Lord's feet. And then he spoke about the Yamuna, how it bathed the whole body of Krishna many times over, and therefore he declared that the Yamuna was the greater river. And Akbar was so pleased by his arguments that he offered him anything that he wanted. He said, take what you want. And you know what he got? What he asked for? Paper. Because paper had just come out. It was like a new thing, right? And previously he used to write on palm leaves, but then he'd seen that all these books there that the scribes were writing on was paper. So the emperor gave him heaps of paper, and he also donated funds for the preservation of all the Goswami's writing. And it's said that later on, that when Emperor Akbar was in Mathura, he actually walked on pilgrimage to take darshan of Jiva Goswami, and then Jiva took him around on a parikram. This is the emperor of the whole of India. He went on parikram with Jiva Goswami. So Janava Mata, who was the widow of Lord Nityananda, she also was in touch with Jiva Goswami, and they were in constant communication, and Raghunath Das, of course. So Raghunath Das, before we get to Janavamata, just Raghunath Das, he was living in Radhakund, and Jiva Goswami saw that he was very, very old, and he was looking after him, and it was Raghunath's desire to renovate Radhakund. It was just an extended lake. So then Jiva Goswami organised all of that he organised the excavation, he bought the land, he bought Radhakund, he was a great manager, and then he excavated, and then he organised someone to donate the 8 steps on either side. As we go to Radhakund, we see the steps that are on the side, and that was donated by Raj Singh, who was building the Govinda temple for Rupa Goswami. So therefore, and he always took care of, made sure that Raghunath Das was looked after there. So then Janava Mata came in, she went and took darshan of him, and then she asked him that can he please provide these beautiful books to Bengal, because the Vaishnavas in Bengal were starved of Krishna conscious. Lord Chaitanya just departed, and they were feeling the separation. So then with his new wave devotees, Narottam Das, Shyamananda and Srinivas, who had just turned up, and they were actually in his school being educated, he orchestrated that they take the books to Bengal, and that is a story in itself also. And so all the books of the Goswamis went to Bengal, and subsequently, I just have to just say in conclusion that a couple of 100 years later, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was searching for Chaitanya Charitamrita and couldn't find any book there until he finally did find one, most likely would have been orchestrated by Jiva Goswami through the agency of Narottam Srinivas to actually provide that there, and from then on another new wave of Krishna consciousness comes. So we're all connected through the acharyas there, and through the 6 Goswamis, so it's very nice to hear about the exploits of Goswamis. So at this point in time I just say Sri Jiva Goswami Ki Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Over time.